video, another pre-discussion video pertaining to our lesson for finals. So we've already done discussing the topics in prelim to semifinal. So now let's go and discuss the first topic for finals. So without further ado, let's start. But before that, let's know first what is the topic for this afternoon. Of course, our topic would be chemical reactions and equations. We've already done discussing what are those types of chemical reactions. So today, how can we solve a different equation pertaining to chemical reaction? So before that, let's define or review first chemical reaction. As we all know, it is the process by which a chemical change takes place. And also, to be exact, or to define it in easy way, chemical reaction is a change where a new substance is formed. Meaning to say, from the other substance that being solved, that being what do you call this, combined, there is new substance that being formed. To explain it further, let's review also the types of chemical reaction. We already discussed what are combination or synthesis reaction. This is from from single substance to combining to another substance, then creating a new form of substance. How about decomposition reaction? It is from one substance that divided into two, one substance and another substance. So the result will be in the substance that is being formed. While in single replacement reaction, it is actually replacing the one substance replaces to another substance. You have to replace it, just replace it. That is why it's called single replacement reaction, because you will be replacing one substance to another substance. Lastly, next we have double replacement reaction. As we all know, it is single replacement and double replacement is different by the means of, in single replacement you will be replacing only one, but in double replacement you will be replacing the two. So you will be replacing two a substance to another substance. So just by that, you can have the result, which is double replacement reaction. Then lastly, we have combustion reaction. Combustion reaction, it is basically a type of reaction that the chemical reaction between substances will usually including oxygen and usually accompanied by the generation of heat and light in the form of flame. That is why, as you can see here in the illustration below, that from the substances which include oxygen, it is literally accompanied by generation of heat. So meaning to say, the result of each substances will form into flame. So that is the types of chemical reactions, from combination or synthesis reaction to combustion reaction. So now let's proceed. So now, since we've already done discussing what is chemical reaction, so now let's know how to solve each chemical reaction. So by that, the topic that we will be discussing is chemical equation. So chemical equation is a written symbolic representation of chemical reaction. Yes, it is the shorthand way of expressing chemical reaction using numbers, symbols, and formula. So by this time, you will be solving some equation. Will be knowing the formulas. And kasi why? Kasi when we say a chemical reaction, kasi it is a written symbolic representation of chemical reaction. We need to say the example, the application part is in the chemical equation. So much for that. We will discuss it furthermore by the next slide. So a balanced chemical equation occurs when the number of different atoms of elements and reactants side equal to that of the product side. So, meaning to say, in chemical reaction, in chemical equation, there is two major parts. We have reactants and the product. The reactant side and the product side. Meaning to say, reactant side should equal to your product side. By that, you eventually solve a certain chemical equation. Once you balance the certain chemical equation. Okay, let's move. So what is the differences between reactants and the products? So reactants, it is the starting materials. And these are the substance that changes when it is combined with another substance in a chemical reaction. While product, that is why it's called product nga, because product is the new substance coming from the reactants, which is your substance or your starting materials. From that starting materials, you can made or form a new substance, and that new substance is called products. So it is the substance that result of the chemical reaction. So that's why on chemical equation, how can you solve it? You have to balance the reactant to the product. Okay, so let's proceed. In solving also in chemical equation, not only the reactant and the product, coefficient and subscript is also important. Why? Because it's actually what we call this combined or there already in a certain element. So coefficient and subscript is always there in a chemical equation. What is the differences between coefficient and a subscript? Coefficient is the number before the symbol or formula of a substance. So meaning to say, in coefficient, the number is in the starting point. The number before the symbol. So as you can see in the illustration below, makikita ninyo what is the coefficient there and what is the subscript. While it is different to the subscript because subscript is the number of atoms of the elements found in the substance. Meaning to say, the shortened one or after the substance, after the element, so that is the subscript. While coefficient is before the symbol of an element. Yun. So that is the differences between coefficient and subscript. Okay? So these are the symbols used in chemical equation and its meaning. So for the symbols like this, like positive or the plus sign, it is used to separate one reactant or product from another. It can be read as reacts with when used in reactant. Read as N when it is used in a product. So that is the meaning of the symbol. So please be reminded that all of the function of each symbol is constant. Meaning to say that is its meaning. So hindi yan napapalitan. So that is constant, and the symbol itself also constant. Okay, next we have this one, the arrow. It is used to separate the reactants from the product. Read as yields or produces in an equation. So this is that is the meaning of that symbol. While here, the letter S, it indicates the substance is in the solid state. So once that the reactant or a certain compound or element has this symbol, meaning to say that compound or that element is indicate that the substance is in the solid state. Yon. Okay? So let's proceed to another slide. Aside from that, we also, since we've mentioned the state of matter, of course, not only in an element or in an element in periodic table, not only solid is being discussed or is being said, but also it complete with liquid and gases. So in liquid, it indicates that the substance is in liquid, like for example letter L here. So it indicates, while in the gas or the G symbols, it indicates that the substance is in the gas. So the same with the solid, no? The same with the solid, no? Once the compound or the reactant or either the product itself has this symbol, so meaning to say that is indicate with the solid, liquid, and gas. However, we also have this AQ. It actually stands for the substance that being dissolved in water. So comes from the term aqueous. That's why it's AQ, because that symbol comes from the term aqueous. Okay, so below we also have this kind of triangle and arrow below. It indicates that there is a heat applied or needed to make the reaction proceed. So that is the symbols, the different symbols that you can found in a chemical equation and its meaning. So I hope you familiarize and know their function and their meaning, so that you can know how to solve each equation. Okay? let's proceed. So let's now try for an example. So example, sodium plus water. So what will be the product? We have sodium hydroxide plus hydrogen gas. Okay, so symbols is being discussed here. May symbol din. So what is symbol? It is used reacts. N. Yan na pabasa. Plus here can be read as N or what do you call this? N or reacts. Okay? So as you can see, tingnan muna natin lahat ng ating na-discuss na. So we have reactants here, both sodium and hydrogen. Then the coefficient here, as I've said, coefficient is una, first number from the symbol is a coefficient. While the while this part na wala na nalagay, I think na miss lang, this is the product, and how about the what they call this, yung maliit na number 2 dito. So it is a subscript. Again, first number in the symbol is a coefficient, while the number that is in the lower part is a subscript. So aside from that, we also have here a symbol for liquid. Okay, nakita nyo, di ba? So that is an example of a certain reactant and a product in a certain chemical equation. So let's give some example pa. So how can, before we that is the example of the discussion that I've been discussed earlier. So now, how can we solve a certain chemical equation? Of course, we will be undergoing the process called chemical balancing equation. So chemical balancing equation has its own easy and quick type how to solve it. So there are a lot of easy ways. I've already gave you a link with the YouTube or the 5 easy ways. I think 5 or 10. Correct me if I'm mistaken with the ilan yon ang ipakita ko sa inyo, but I think it's almost 5. Okay, when we say 5 to 10, so you can eventually find the solution of that equation in a 5 ways, quick, easy way on how can you balance a certain equation. So there are a lot of references, there are a lot of video, there are a lot of tutorial on how can you get the chemical balancing equation in an easy way. Marami. There's so many ways. So you should look for that, and of course, I will be helping you also. Okay, let's proceed. So before we will go with how can we or solving that part, let's go now on the basis of the balancing equation. Of course, first one is the law of conservation of mass. Law of conservation of mass is the sum of the masses of the product is always the same as the sum of the masses of the reactants. So total mass reactant is equal to total mass product. It is also state that when we say law of conservation of mass, it is a chemical reaction, or chemical reaction mass is neither created nor destroyed. So that is in a simple way of discussing law of conservation of mass. It focuses, or it states that in chemical reaction of mass, it is neither created or nor destroyed. So meaning to say, there are a lot of changes in this kind of bases. Okay, so let's proceed to another slide, of course, to continue our discussion. So steps, let's go now on knowing the steps in balancing chemical equation. So first one is check for diatomic molecules. When we say diatomic molecules, these are the molecules composed of only 2 of either the same or different chemical elements. So it includes actually this type of element. So please take note with that. So diatomic molecules, you have to find first what are those diatomic molecules in your equation. Next, so as you can see, this is the illustration that composed of some diatomic molecules. So naka-highlighted, those highlighted part is those highlighted elements are part of diatomic molecules. So next, second, or step number 2, check whether the chemical formulas of all the reactants and products are correct. Check the total number of atoms of each element on each side of the equation. So, yun na nga. That's why you have to balance it. So, meaning to say, you have literally to what? Dissect each number, dissect those chemical reaction, or check those chemical reaction, check those products and reactants. Of course, check those total number of atoms. Yan ang kailangan mong tingnan of each element, if that each element is balanced or not. If it is not balanced, you have to do the equation, or you have to do the solving part. So third step, a polyatomic ion appearing unchanged on the both sides of the equation is counted as a single unit. So always remember what are always be observable also with the polyatomic ion appearance, kasi so some of the equation has a polyatomic atomic ion that appearing unchanged on the both sides so of the equation. So meaning to say, if you can eventually saw a polyatomic ion that is unchanged both sides of equation, you will be counted as a single unit. So what is polyatomic ion pala? So when we say poly, from the root polyatomic ion, from the root word itself, poly. So meaning to say, it is an ion composed of more than one atom. Polyatomic ion. So what are those examples of polyatomic ions? We have sulfate ion, hydroxide ion, hydronium, ammonium ion. So that is a example of polyatomic ion. Okay, let's move to another slide. And I think that is the kala ko yun yung last part. So the fourth one would be balance the elements one at a time by using coefficient. Must not attempt to balance the equation by changing the subscript in the chemical formula of substance. So no, don't worry, kasi I will be showing you how to create these steps, paano gawin. So next, the last one, check each atom or polyatomic ion to be sure that the equation is being balanced. So let's go now on the example itself. Let's try to balance a certain unbalanced chemical equation. Okay, let's move. So for example number 1, yun na nga, step 1, write down your given equation. So as you can see, we have here a different type of compound and an element. So the first step you will be doing, write down your given equation. Next, write down the number of atoms per element. So meaning to say, number of atoms per element, it is pertaining on your number of atoms. Okay, for the reactants, for the reactant, we have carbon. The subscript of carbon, or the number of atoms of carbon, is 3. While hydrogen is 8 and oxygen is 2. While in our product, the number of hydrogen is 2, the number of oxygen is 3, and the number of carbon is 1. Literally, the equation is unbalanced. So let's try to solve, and let's try to balance this type of chemical equation. So the second step that you will be going to do is you have to write the number of atoms per element. It's very simple kasi nandyan naman din. You can eventually see the subscript in each element. Okay? Let's try to find out how to make it balance. So step 3, use coefficient to balance the equation. So meaning to say, you will use coefficient. Okay, so now let's find out how to balance it using the coefficient. So since the reactant has a highest number of atoms, which is 8 for the hydrogen, or hydrogen itself is the subscript that has a highest number of atoms. Okay, so as we can see here in the example, it is not balanced to the product. Why? In the reactant, it is 8. And in the product, it is actually 2, right? 2. Oo, 2. So, how can we make it into 8? So, just find a number that you can multiply by 2 and the result is 8. So, what number that can we multiply into 2, then the result is the result is 8? It is 4. So, you have to multiply it into 4. Okay, so you have to put the subscript 4 here and multiply it into we have to put a coefficient here 4 and multiply it to the subscript of hydrogen, which is 2. Then the result is 8. So, hydrogen now is being balanced. Okay, balanced na siya, right? So, next one is, of course, the next highest number of subscript or the number of atom. We have carbon. Carbon. Okay, for carbon, we have subscript, in the reactant, we have 3. So, let's put also let's put the coefficient in the product, which is 3. Kasi bakit? We will balance also the oxygen, right? So, makikita nyo kung bakit nilagyan ng 3. Why 3 kailangan natin ilagay sa carbon? Kasi carbon is also 3 in the reactant. So, now if you put 3 in the product, that is being balanced, right? So, now, how can we get the 10 in this one, this part? 10 na to. Why? Because in the reactant, in the product itself, 'di ba, we put a coefficient 4. So 4, multiply it by the subscript of oxygen that is invisible. Take a look with the product. Sa product muna tayo, ha. The oxygen that is invisible, na hindi nakikita, 'di ba? If an element has no subscript, meaning to say may 1 na siya. So 4 multiply it by 1 equals to 4. So the oxygen here is 4. Then we have also oxygen in the carbon, right? So that's why we put 3 here in coefficient, kasi 3 times 2 is equals to 6. And yan na ang, and 6 plus the oxygen here in itong una, 6 plus 4 na ginawa natin, it is 10. So that's why the oxygen in product is 10. So, how can we make the reactant sa 10? So, napakadali lang. You have to find a number that can multiply into 2 and has a result which is 10. What number is that? It is 5. So, literally, the equation now is being balanced. Ganun lang, ha? So, if you put a coefficient in the first element, naaapektuhan din yung pangalawang element, ha? Always remember that one, that in putting the coefficient, hindi lang yung single element ang naaapektuhan niya. Naaapektuhan din niya yung ikalawang element na nilagay mo sa isa-isang equation. So that's why 4 and 3 coefficient here, naapektuhan si oxygen. But literally, it's being balanced naman with the in multiplying it to the subscript. Yon. So what is the balance equation? We have C3, carbon 3, or C3H8 plus 5O2, which is the reactant. And the product, we have 4 H2O and the 3 CO2. Okay, so that is the equation that being balanced. Okay, let's go now. Let's try another example. So how about this one? As you can see, there is no such more subscript, right? Parang 2 lang. Ito lang sa sodium lang ang, at saka yung the sodium and silver only has its own subscript, right? So let's try to solve also this one. So the very first thing you have to do is to write down your given equation. So of course, you have to write down the reactants in the product. Next is you have to write down the number of atoms per element. It is very simple. As I've said, if the element has no subscript, meaning to say, it is equivalent to 1. Kasi element itself is 1 na. So from silver, we have 1. While iodine is also 1 because it has no subscript. Sodium is 2 because it has subscript, right? Naka-constant na siya. And of course, for sulfur, we have also 1. that is in the reactant. While in the product, we have silver, which is 2, and the sulfur, iodine, which is 1, sodium, which is 1 also, and the sulfur, which is 1. So basically, the equation is not balanced. So let's try it to make it balanced. After you put the number of atoms or the subscript of each element, let's try to make it into balance. So how? Use coefficient to balance the equation. So how can we make it? So literally, we have to put again a coefficient. So let's try to balance first the silver. So first, let's balance first the silver, right? So in silver in the product, we have 2. So how can we make the reactant 2? Of course, let's put a number that can we multiply by 1, then result into 2. What is that number? Of course, 2. 2 times 1, because in the silver, it is 1. 2 times 1, it is 2. So silver now is being balanced. 2, silver, 2 also. The silver in reactant 2 and the silver in reactant in product is also 2. Let's go now in iodine. As I've said, if you put a coefficient in the first element, it will reacts also in the second element. Naaapektuhan sa second element. So how can we make it into how can we balance it? Of course, let's try to look the subscript of the product. For the subscript of the product in iodine, we have 2, right? Meron din tayong 2. Okay. Kasi bakit siya naging 2? Why there is a 2 in the product, or why iodine is 2? Kasi si reactant 2 na eh. As I've said, nilagyan nyo ng coefficient 2 si silver, so maaapektuhan si 1 dito na iodine. So from the 1 iodine here, so wala pang na-solve, wala pa na-balance, inputting the coefficient 2 here, magiging 2 na rin si iodine. Bakit? 2 times 1 is equals to 2. So since si iodine sa reactants ay 2 na, let's balance it in the product. So sa product, the original ni iodine din sa product is 1. So how can we make it into 2? Let's just put subscript also in the sodium sa product. So we have 2 also, 2 subscript let's put it not subscript pala, coefficient. Sorry. Nalilito na lang kayo. Coefficient. Let's also put coefficient in sodium, which is 2. So 2 times 1, iodine yun na nga pag sinasabi ko, pag nilagay si coefficient sa isang element, naapektuhan ng sunod na element. So, nandito si coefficient 2 sa sodium, we will be multiplying it to 1 in the iodine. Of course, it is 2. So, by that, in the table, as you can see, the iodine itself is balanced. Okay? So, sa silver dito ha, na typo error lang to, 2 yan. 2 and 2. Reactant 2, and the product 2 also. Okay, balance. So let's go now for the sodium. So in the reactant, sodium itself has a subscript which is 2. Anong gagawin natin? Since si sodium dito is 1. Of course, since you put already 2 here, coefficient in the sodium, 2 times 1 is equals to 2. So that creates a balance in the equation. So since the sodium is 2, in the reactants and the product itself also 2 because of the coefficient that you put in the sodium. So that makes it balanced. And lastly, the sulfur. So for sulfur, balance pa rin siya kasi sulfur has a 1 subscript, and also in the reactant and also in the product has its 1 subscript. So that's it. That is how you balance the certain equation. So meron tayong nabalance na natin. As you can see here, ito. So, from not balanced equation to balanced equation. Always remember, use the coefficient to balance the equation. And use a number that can multiply its subscript. Okay. Sige, let's move forward. So, another example. So, we have here, So we have here different element again. We have barium, nitrogen, and hydrogen. So we also have another element in a certain in a product, reactant in a product. So what you're gonna do first, you have to write down your given equation. So write it first. The next, you have to write down the number of the atoms per element, or the what? The subscript itself. So as I've said, number per element. Element, not compound po. So you have to make it one by one talaga. Even though naka-compound yan, dapat one by one pa rin ang pagkuha ng subscript. So let's start with the barium. Si barium sa reactant, we have 3. Nitrogen, we have 2. Hydrogen, we have 2. And oxygen, we have 1. For the product, barium, we have 1. Nitrogen, we have 1. Hydrogen, we have 2. And oxygen, we have 2. So let's now try to balance this equation. So use coefficient to balance the equation. How? Sabi ko nga, by putting a certain coefficient. So let's start on the barium itself. So for the barium, for the reactant, we have 3, right? So it is not balanced kasi, why? Kasi 1 ang sa product. So how can we do that? Let's put a coefficient or a number that can multiply into 1 that has a result which is 3. So anong number yon? Of course, 3 also. 3 times 1, which is the barium itself, it makes it into 3. So from the barium, it is being balanced na. Barium 3 from the reactant and barium 3 from the product. So let's go now with the nitrogen. So in the nitrogen here, in the reactant, we have 2. But in the nitrogen in the product, we have 1. So not balanced again. How can we make it into 2? Put again a coefficient that can multiply into 1 and has a result which is 2. What is that number? We have 2. 2 times 1 is equals to 2. So literally, nitrogen now is being balanced. So nitrogen is 2. Nitrogen is also 2. Okay? Let's move now into oxygen. So in the oxygen, let's move now into hydrogen. Last pala si oxygen. So from hydrogen, we have here since we put 6 here in the coefficient, let's put 6. 6. Why? In the product kasi, we have 12 hydrogen sa product itself. So let's put 6 in the reactant. So 6 coefficient, multiply it by 2 is equals to 12. So in the reactant, we have 12 subscript for hydrogen. However, in the product, we have a hydrogen, right? So here, how can we solve it in the product? Of course, as I've said, if you put the coefficient in an element, maaapektuhan si second or si element na nasumunod sa element na nilagyan ng coefficient. So since barium here has a 3 coefficient, we have to multiply it in the hydrogen here, which is 2. Okay? We have to put hydrogen 2. So 3 times 2 is equals to 6. So hindi pa rin balance. Why? Because in the reactant, we have 12, right? So let's go to the another compound here kasi meron pang hydrogen dito. So since we put 2 in nitrogen, kasi nga, coefficient 2 here, maaapektuhan ulit si hydrogen 3 here. So 2 times 3 is also 6. So 6 plus 6 is equals to 12. So hydrogen here is being balanced. Okay? For the last one, we have a oxygen. Again, ulit na naman ng process. Since we have coefficient in the hydrogen 6, we have to multiply it into the oxygen, which is 1. 6 times 1 equals 6. Here in the oxygen, barium also has its 3. Then multiply its 2, we have 6 also. So, oxygen is being balanced. Yan. So, that's it. It is very easy, no, to balance a certain equation. Okay, let's move. So, now, since I've already given you some example, I already discussed it, try to answer or try this equation. Send your answer on GC. Okay, so I think that is the last slide in our discussion for this afternoon. So thank you very much for listening. I hope that you've already understand how to solve, or to oh or how to solve a certain equation, a chemical equation, or how to balance a chemical equation. If you have question, clarification to me, just leave it in our GC. Thank you very much and have a nice day.